All right, today we're diving into this really powerful essay that kind of reframes our entire political debate. It's got a wild title: The Bars, the Battlefield, and the Frankenstein Corporation. And, it kicks off with a pretty unsettling question. I mean, really think about that for a second. What if the very solutions we cook up to solve our biggest problems are actually, secretly, making them worse in ways we don't even notice? Well, that's the exact idea we're going to unpack here. Okay, so to really get to the heart of this essay, we've got to start with a basic truth about society itself. And it's this: we're all built on constraints. And look, this isn't some political hot take, it's more of an evolutionary fact, really. Think about it. From ancient tribes all the way to modern countries, rules and obligations have always been our social operating system. They're not a bug in the code, they're the feature that lets us work together and, not fall apart. I mean, no serious political philosophy is out there arguing for a world with zero rules. So here's the crucial point. The real fight, when you get right down to it, isn't about having rules versus not having rules. The fight is over who gets to make them. And this, right here, is where our modern political battle lines are drawn, with two totally different ways of looking at the same problem. So let's start with what the essay calls the prison cell model. This is the progressive perspective. The idea here is that society, for many people, feels like a prison cell. And the guards, they're the giant corporations. The argument goes that corporate power creates these invisible walls that trap us and limit our real freedom. So what does that prison look like? Well, according to this view, the bars on the cell are the healthcare system, something you feel like you can't escape. Then you've got the chains. That's the food system, the one that relentlessly markets sugar to kids for breakfast, shaping what we eat and who we become. And the shackles? Well, those are the pharmaceutical dependencies that can follow. So if you see the world this way, the solution's pretty clear, right? The government has to step in. It needs to use regulation to break those chains and set people free. Regulation isn't the problem, it's the key to liberation. But, and this is the big twist in the essay, what if that very solution, state intervention, has accidentally created a whole new kind of problem? A kind of monster hiding in plain sight. This brings us to an idea from this 19th century economist Frederick Bastiat. He had this brilliant insight. When it comes to public policy, we only ever judge what we can see right in front of us. We totally ignore the slow, indirect, creeping effects that only show up years or even decades later. And this right here is a perfect example of his point. What we see from regulation are the obvious benefits. Inspected meat, safer drugs, all that good stuff. And hey, those are important. But what we don't see, the unseen part, is how all those complex rules create massive hurdles for small businesses. It makes it harder to compete, which leads to fewer players in the market and power getting concentrated in just a few giant companies. And this is what leads to that unintended creation. It's a creature born not from pure free market capitalism, but from this weird fusion of corporate power and government regulation. The essay gives it a name: the Frankenstein Corporation. Think of it like this. It's a giant company that's been stitched together with regulations and subsidies. It's too big to fail, too complicated to challenge. It actually uses all that red tape not as a burden, but as a weapon, a kind of moat to keep all the smaller, scrappy competitors out. The key takeaway here is that it exists because of the regulatory state, not despite. So, okay, if this thing exists, why can't we just fix it? Well, the essay argues it's because both sides are locked in this political battlefield, and they're starting from completely different places. They can't even agree on what the root cause of the problem is. It's like they're speaking different languages. When progressives say we need to regulate, they're thinking, let's protect people. But what libertarians hear is, let's create more monopolies. And then when libertarians say we need to deregulate, they're thinking, let's spark some competition. But what progressives hear is, let's just hand the keys to the kingdom over to the corporations. They are completely, totally talking past each other. Now, to be fair, the essay points out that libertarians have their own blind spots here too. There's this belief that you can just, persuade the state to shrink itself, which, let's be honest, almost never happens. Plus, their whole argument is based on these unseen consequences. And that is a really, really tough thing to sell to voters who care about what they can see right here, right now. So this all leads to a kind of third option, an unspoken possibility. What if the goal isn't to win the fight for control in Washington? What if the goal is to shrink the entire battlefield? And this is the really provocative question at the heart of the essay. what if the true enemy isn't the corporation itself, but the centralized federal state that gives it its power in the first place? The very system that creates and feeds these Frankenstein corporations. So the path forward proposed here isn't about getting rid of rules entirely, not at all. It's about relocating them. The idea is to shrink the power of the federal regulatory machine and push that power back down to states and local communities. That way, the constraints we live under are more local, you can actually argue about them, and they're more accountable to the people they affect. It's about letting communities figure out what works for them, instead of having one-size-fits-all rules for everyone. Because if we just stay on the current path, the essay argues the outcome is pretty predictable. The cycle just keeps going. More federal rules lead to bigger, more consolidated companies. And in the end, the bars on that prison cell just get thicker, and the monster we built by accident, well, it just keeps getting stronger. And so we're left with this final, really provocative thought. If the system we have now is just too dug in, too entrenched to ever be reformed from the inside, is the only way out a kind of structural rupture? A fundamental breaking apart and decentralizing of power? It's a huge, challenging question, and definitely one worth chewing on long after we're done here.